Welcome to another episode of Judgment Date. As you know by now, these are programs that we've been running in an attempt to help people through the difficult times of a lockdown, to deal with a whole range of issues which deal directly with the lockdown and by implication, which are going to have effects upon upon our lives as we get out of COVID-19, whenever that may be. But today it's a pleasure to welcome Johann van Loggerenberg, who describes himself now as a tax practitioner, and as you will see from his background, an author of a couple of very significant books. Jan, welcome and thank you for being on the program with us. I wonder whether I could start off, because of your experience at SARS and the entire sorry saga with which you've had to be confronted, just what effect has had this on tax collection in South Africa? This entire long and dreadful episode, which culminated the other day with apparently an abandonment by the authorities of any basis for the so-called rogue unit allegations. What do you, I mean, you were in SARS, you were important there, you were part of an investigative arm. What effect has this had on tax collection in your view?
Thank you for the opportunity, Judge. It's a privilege. I think one should always go and look at the numbers first if you want to answer that kind of question, because it's typically there where you will measure the efficacy of a revenue authority. Since 1994 until 2013, there has been a consistent growth in the tax base, meaning more and at the same time, the revenue collections that government required in terms of its target had been increasing consistently year on year, with the exception of the fiscal year 2008-9, which of course was the year with the worldwide financial meltdown. Although comparatively to other revenue authorities, the South African Revenue Service did not do that badly. All of this then changed, if you look at that graph, from the years 2014-15 onwards. It plateaued. In the following year, there was an under-collection of just over 11 billion rand, which doubled the following year to somewhere around 22 billion. And then the following year, more than doubled to an under-collection of 48 billion rand. So government was effectively becoming poorer year on year. Now, of course, it's not only attributable to the drama at the Revenue Service. It's also tough economic times that contributed to that. But it's not the first time that South Africa had to face tough economic times. I guess it's probably the effect and that speaks directly to the question. The effect is that I don't think people are cautious of our revenue and custom service anymore. Certainly not as they were. I mean, in the years 1999 or 1998 to 2014, when I was there, the Revenue Service was constantly in the news worldwide for good things. We were being praised by developed states for what we were doing. Developed states sent working teams to come and study how we were conducting our investigations and audits and planning and so forth. Lots of academic institutions came and sat with us, and they were interested in this story about the Revenue Service. And all of that changed almost overnight towards the end of 2014. And for the next 3 years, it was just calamity after calamity. If you read anything about the Revenue Service, it was bad news. It was scandal upon failure upon failure, to the extent that simple things slipped through the net. I can just name a few. One was the long-standing and dearly fought for pay now, argue later rule, which was a constitutional victory in the early 2000s, setting the country among a benchmark of developed states, which somehow slipped through with a very poorly defended matter in the High Court Division of Pretoria, where it's now not as fixed as it used to be anymore. And there's nothing wrong with the judgment. I think there was something wrong with the manner in which it was handled. So you get what, the courts will give you what you put before the courts. Another even more embarrassing example was how the Durban High Court criticized the Revenue Service for trying to use evidence obtained in a tax inquiry, which is similar to a liquidation inquiry, where you are obliged to honestly answer, even if you incriminate yourself, but it's ring-fenced. And they attempted to use this to try and criminally prosecute the taxpayer in a criminal court. Those sorts of examples, that to me suggested big trouble. And ultimately, Judge, I can tell you, I don't see any evidence of an enforcement capacity within the Revenue Service. And as we all know, revenue and customs authorities worldwide survive on three key pillars. On the one hand, they need to provide an accessible service that's friendly and easy understood and easy to operate. And that's usually referred to as the service element. The second one then relates to education. In other words, the tax base, those people and businesses out there who are eligible and should participate in the tax regime, must understand what their obligations are, how they must put themselves on the register, once they are on the register, when they must do what. So by what point must they submit what, and when must they pay by when. Failing which, the third element then comes into play, which is the enforcement consequence. And the enforcement consequence, certainly in the years that I was there, was based on a single premise that said the taxpayer's behavior will dictate the nature of the punitive consequences that follow. So if you do something wrong in error, that's recognized. But if you're going to try and steal money from the fiscus, which means you're actually stealing from your fellow citizen in the country, then you're going to have to pay a more dear price.
So I suppose I just say one thing, because obviously I've been involved in this myself. I do think over the last year, since Kisvet has taken over, there have been serious attempts to right the ship, if I could put it that way. But it takes a long time, because would you not agree with me that what he inherited when he came in was an utter mess, precisely because of what you've documented yourself?
Oh, absolutely, Judge. I agree with you. I don't envy any person inheriting that mess, because I come from there and I realize what the mess really means at an intricate level. So he's certainly a brave man in that respect. I must just say, though, Judge, I'm curious why the Revenue Service under Mr. Kieswetter has not bothered to reach out and see if one couldn't have buried this rogue unit nonsense for once and for all, and properly so. I've seen two vague statements issued over the time, and they don't say much. But other than that, certainly I have seen some good signs in different parts of our economy. I think COVID has thrown a spanner in the works now. But yes, I think he comes with a good pedigree, knows the institution.
Well, you must have worked with him. You must have worked with him because he was there when you were there.
Correct, but the institution was chopped up into multiple parts, and I had very little to do with him.
No, I appreciate that, but that was the heyday of SARS, that period under Praveen Gordhan going forward.
Absolutely. No, I remember working with him. I remember working with him on a planning session one evening on a Friday, and we worked through the night until the next morning so that the the first draft could be ready to be presented. So in that sense, I did come to know him as a hard worker.
I don't want to spend a long time debating Ed Kieswetter, because I do think that my own personal experience has been there's been really massive efforts to repair the damage which you've documented. But let me go back to that damage. How much was incompetence and how much was deliberate?
I think it started off with a lot of incompetence, Judge, but in time, it became far more deliberate and malicious and organized. So if I can put it to you simply without taking too much time, had I not dated a certain lawyer who happened to be a triple agent, and had that relationship not ended acrimoniously, and had she not responded to me in the manner that she did on the 28th of May, the capture of the Revenue Service and the decimation of its enforcement capabilities would still have happened. I just think it would have taken on a completely different form. We would not have had the rogue unit narrative. We may well have had something else, whatever that may have been.
So let me just talk about the rogue unit aspect for a moment, because I mean, I've read statements that you've made, and I know that presumably because of the withdrawal effectively and therefore the court order, mercifully this has passed us. But take the press, for example. They seem to bear a huge responsibility here in having perpetrated fake news. I mean, what I'm asking you is, this wouldn't have happened unless there were institutions which are key to democracy actually allowing this to happen.
Yes, Judge. I believe they were caught off guard.
And why? What was going on, in your view, which allowed this to happen?
I would, by and large, attribute it partly to the ability of the protagonists to be rather convincing. They were con artists, so they were very good at packaging their stories in a manner in which no journalist would have ignored or could have ignored the story. So there's part culpability there. The culpability I would attribute to the media per se, and here I specifically refer to the Sunday Times and to Carte Blanche, the television show, would be that A, they were completely naive, B, they put absolutely no effort whatsoever into verifying what they were given, or even obtaining opinions and views and comments or anything that contradicted the stories. And I think in some instances there were relationships and behind the scenes interactions that were improper and untoward, and knowledge that they had which they never disclosed.
Still to this day.
Still to this day.
So are you suggesting that the newspapers and Carte Blanches, I mean, whoever it was, in a sense owe the country a fuller and more comprehensive explanation?
I personally believe so, Judge. Just like in the same way I believe KPMG and Advocate Sikakane and others owe the nation an explanation. The closest I've ever come to seeing an explanation was Judge Kroon, who actually went under oath and explained and answered to questions.
Although, in fairness, advocates can make mistakes.
Well, if that be the case, then say so.
Yeah. Sorry?
If of course they do, and all of us do make mistakes as human beings.
Yeah.
Yes. But then if that was a mistake, say so. Don't keep quiet about it.
Well, maybe. Although I have to say, to be fair, it's not for me to defend any particular advocate. Although I have to say, in my long experience as law, I've never seen advocates who have made mistakes apologize, frankly, for the mistake. We all make mistakes. But having said that, let me ask you this. What lessons do we now learn from this? I mean, in the reconstruction, and I suppose that's what I'm really interested in, of constitutional democracy in South Africa. This has been a very long-running show. It's obviously caused huge pain and anxiety to yourselves and the other people who are implicated. But in the broader sense, I mean, you're uniquely placed to have, because of the experience you've had. What lessons do we now learn so that we shouldn't allow this to ever happen again?
Off the cuff, Judge, I would say three things. One is that the constitutional imperative that rests upon state organs to act in the interests of the state and each other and their different mandates should be a supreme and guiding light in whatever they do. That means that state intelligence agencies, the police, the Revenue Service, Home Affairs, and you name it, should put far more effort into building bridges and sharing and looking out for each other and leveraging off each other's strengths and compensating for their weaknesses. Because all of these departments are in different phases of development where we are in our developmental state. So where one can do something better than the other one, help each other out. If you do that, then you will not have a situation where con artists will go and sell a nonsense story to an Inspector General of Intelligence. And people will be incapable of verifying or cross-verifying what's being put to them. Because, had that happened, that would have just come out straight away. So I would say that the cooperative governance in the different parts of the state, I don't think is properly set in place. It's not properly prioritized, and you need a framework for that. And it's something that you need to build. It will take time, maybe many years, but it should be part of every strategic plan, of any government department. The second thing I would say is that we need to insulate, is a better word, the different parts of government, the criminal justice system, but also those other parts of government that have investigative components or anti-corruption components, to be able to distinguish between a genuine, bona fide whistleblower and somebody who's trying to enter the system in order to cause havoc and chaos, and basically use the system for nefarious purposes. And that goes the same for the media. I think the media needs to put up hurdles that's capable of distinguishing between the bona fide person who's coming to you with information and so forth, and somebody else who's up to no good. That's the second thing. I think the third thing is that there needs to be consequences to those people who have caused this, whatever those consequences may be, and however that occurs. So there needs to be a platform where, I don't want to mention names, but those people who have openly stated as fact that, this unit broke into Mr. Zuma's home, or this unit ran a brothel, or whatever the case might be. They must be exposed and confronted. They cannot be allowed to hide behind anonymity of press freedom. It doesn't belong in a democratic constitutional state.
Well, that was why I don't want to get into debate about advocates' opinions, etc. But I do think there's a big difference between giving an opinion, which may or may not be correct, depending on the evidence that is provided to that advocate on the one hand, and people deliberately making up stories, journalists making up stories, and people doing what you're suggesting. It seemed to me that what you're saying there is there has to be a level of accountability. Otherwise, we're going to reproduce the system all over again, and there'll be another Johann van Loggerenberg who gets into trouble in exactly the same way as you have. So I wonder if I can then move on, because I can't help but see behind you, of course, the whole issue of tobacco wars. And whilst I don't want to have you, because it's a case before the courts at the moment, and don't want to get into the legitimacy of the cigarette ban, I suppose you are intimately involved in much of this customs stuff. So there are two questions, a broader one. Are you of the view, I mean, I know you've been out of SARS for some while, but you're well informed. I assume that much of what that you were picking up at the time is still happening